Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, boxing fans. There's a pretty exciting weekend of boxing. If you weren't aware, that's what I'm here for. I want to cover some of the fights that are happening today. And of course, if you're in a different time zone, you're going to need to calibrate for your own time zone, but I will do the best I can to align it to what's going on and the current scheduled fights that are up. And it's going to be up to you whether or not you follow these, but I do recommend that you follow each and every one of them because by and large, they are solid fights, well worth your time. I will tell you the network that they are taking place on as well so that you can, if you have access to, follow along. And then I will talk about the story of the fighters. Now, in a previous update, I talked about, I've not covered a lot of these different weight classes. And so right now I'm trying to get more coverage probably on a weekly basis unless there's something specifically called out that I do need to talk about, but generally probably weekly. I'll just cover these different fights that I think are worth your time. Now, let me just kind of break down what we're dealing with here in some of these fights, starting at the top. Vasily Lomachenko versus Richard Comey. Now, you're not if you haven't followed the lightweight division, but a lot's been happening in lightweight, so you should. But if you haven't followed the lightweight division, right now, if you talk about the top dog in terms of the perception of skill, it's got to be Vasily Lomachenko. Vasily Lomachenko, in his most recent fight, stopped Nakatani, and Nakatani was a legit fighter that had taken a lot of guys to their limits, even though he had lost. He's one of those solid, durable guys, and Vasily Lomachenko managed to get him out of there because Vasily Lomachenko used to be known as Nomaschenko, was able to essentially either frustrate guys into a stoppage or just completely overrun them. Now, I think Lomachenko. I think he's now being overlooked because he took a loss, unfortunately, to Teofimo Lopez for a set of belts unifying the division. And Lomachenko, if you watch that fight, he simply didn't show up. It wasn't that Teofimo was doing anything spectacular. He really wasn't. He was getting caught in the later half of that fight. So I don't want you to believe that he was doing anything masterful or special. Loma just wasn't throwing. For like the first 6 rounds, he wasn't throwing. And then I had it a draw. Just to repeat my scoring for that one, I had it a draw, 6 rounds to Tio in the front, 6 rounds to Loma in the back. No, I did not have T.O. doing a dominant performance in the 12th. It was smoke and mirrors, as my other video showcased. No, it was a chess match. It could have gone either way. I eventually gave it to Loma because T.O. was missing a lot of shots. T.O. was a dirty fighter. At the end of the day, T.O. got his hand raised, and we have to acknowledge this. Now, T.O. then became a diva. He was out partying. It's kind of like Roberto Duran. Same thing. He wins this big one. He's out partying. He's having all this fun. Turns out he was having some familial issues with his newlywed wife, and that may have played a factor. We don't know. He had caught COVID, so now George, aka CM Punk Light Kambosos, is sitting there waiting. It got delayed, I think, 3 times. The initial was supposed to be on Triller. Triller lost millions of dollars because of Tio's antics, and then eventually DAZN picked it up. DAZN ran with it. DAZN got a new star in CM Punk Kambosos, who then pulled out the upset, took out Teofimo in a dominant performance. It wasn't like, you know, like with Tio and Loma, where it's like, no, this is close, and this could have gone either way. No, this is much more dominant of a performance that this guy had done, and so when you see now this step up of Lomachenko fighting Comey, this is not going to be an easy fight for Lomachenko, or at least on paper, it should not be a close. It shouldn't be a close fight. It should be a dominant, but because of the way that Lomachenko in first, Lomachenko has been perceived off the Teofimo loss, people are going to assume that the guy's on the slide, but we have to look at the performance he did against Nakatani, a same Nakatani who essentially exposed what was going on with Teofimo and the flaws in his game. So when we see that Lomachenko's back, he's able to do that outstanding performance against Nakatani, and then he's still here, he's still fighting the game, he's still doing what he feels like he needs to do to get back to the top, which is earn it, not be handed it. We have to give the credit. And I don't think he gets enough credit because of the performance where he just simply didn't show up against Teofimo, but it happens. Turns out he also might have been injured and there were other factors, but I still feel that he could have taken out Teofimo, and he should have. He should have made that guy stop. Teofimo is arguably a basket case, as we saw after the fight with CM Punk Kambosos. He basically snapped and then said, nope, no rematch. We're not doing it. We're just moving up. So you basically are ducking the dude and afraid and running. So tonight's fight now, Richard Comey. Now we know what Loma is. We expect that Loma should be able to take care of Richard Comey in pretty short order if he was able to take out guys like Nakatani, guys like Nick Walters, guys like Mr. Gary Russell Jr. But the difference of Richard Comey is that Richard Comey fancies himself a knockout artist. He is a very powerful puncher. So the look now is, okay, can he handle somebody who is just essentially dangerous? Now, Nakatani had stopped, what the media called boxing's next Cotto, Felix Verdejo, but Felix Verdejo had already been exposed before that fight. So I didn't rate much about that win because it was like you were fighting somebody who was already exposed, and then we don't learn anything new. With Comey, it's a bit different. Comey's most notable fight that I can recall is when he fought Bunny, aka Robert Easter Jr., and that was a very close loss. That was for the IBF at lightweight. And Robert Easter Jr., I'm not going to say he's at the top of the class, but he is stylistically one of the best boxers there is. And ultimately, he was able to take Bunny to the limit. This is in 2016. Then he fights Ray Beltran, and Beltran's most known for having fought Terrence Crawford when Terrence Crawford was at the lower weight classes. But Beltran, is well past the sell date by the time they fought. So it's not like he was at the top, but it took Comey 8 rounds to really get, Beltran out of there. But Beltran had always been a tough fighter, or regarded as a tough fighter. It's always been very difficult to get him out of your way. He's been notorious for just being durable and there to fight. So it's a signature win, but again, we have to look at, okay, how washed was he? Was he kind of done? Was he at the end of his game? So then fast forward, and when we look at Mr. Robert Easter Jr., aka Bunny, Comey, he loses a very, very close loss. Some people argue it's a robbery. I didn't see that because I felt like, again, Easter is a very solid fighter, and he had been spectacular and then went on decline. But he was still a very solid, rock-solid fighter that's just hard to beat. And then when Mikey Garcia came along, Mikey Garcia just dominated him, but it seemed like Bunny was unmotivated in that fight for some reason. And then he fought Rances Barthelemy. Rances Barthelemy is another one at lightweight that's kind of there, but he's like the gatekeeper. He doesn't really step up very much, even though he's a solid fighter in his own right as well. So you got a lot of strong talent at lightweight. That's what I'm trying to get across to you. And a lot of signature fights. And so when Comey's in the mix, Comey has only ever lost to solid fighters. I'm talking really rugged, durable, solid boxers. Is all he ever lost to. So then, again, Comey comes up now later against Teofimo in 2019, and Teofimo just blasts him out, just completely blows him out. And when you look at that fight, Comey performed, but ultimately Teo just blitzed him. And there was nothing he could really do. I think Comey is still there in the mix as a solid, dangerous fighter. He's coming off a solid knockout win. So I think he's dangerous. I think with Teofimo specifically, he just lapsed, and Teo blitzed him and took him out. He is still going to be a threat for Lomachenko. I will say, though, that with Lomachenko, we don't know. He's a little bit older. I wouldn't say he's dirt old. Comey's 34, Loma's 33. So age-wise, they're about roughly in the same range in terms of prime. The thing is that Lomachenko started, he was in the Olympics for a very long time before he went pro. And so when people now, people are criticizing him because of he only has like 18 fights or 17 fights. But when you look at the fighters that he fought, I would say roughly, 75% of them are champions or former champions or where he was defending a title. That's pretty huge considering that he was fresh out when he won his first title. He won the international title, and then he failed to get it done against Salido, who was dirty as all get out, but then he takes out Mr. Gary Russell Jr. for WBO and then defends that at featherweight and then is dominant at junior lightweight. Some people argued he went too much far up. when he went to lightweight when he fought Jorge Linares, but yet Linares was able to drop him, yet Lomachenko was able to get him out of there. I still think he's a live dog, Lomachenko, and I think Comey's a live dog. I say this fight is well worth your time to watch it because I expect that if Comey doesn't quit, which is a possibility, he might quit, but if Comey doesn't quit, I think he gets embarrassed, even though he has moments where he's successful at landing on Lomachenko. That's my theory. I could be completely wrong, but I see that it's not going to be a complete blowout on either side. I think there's going to be some fireworks, and eventually I do see Lomachenko come out on top. This is my find of it. I could be way off, and Loma could be completely washed, but that's not what I see. I see that he's serious about it now. He wants to get his belts back. He's called out CM Punk Kambosos, who now is trying to make a fight with Devin Haney to truly unify the division, because Devin Haney still holds a variant of the WBC title. So there's a lot going on up there, and Loma wants to be in that mix, and that's a huge fight. That's happening at 6 p.m. Pacific, and that's on ESPN. 6 p.m. Pacific is roughly about 4.5 hours from now. So if you're in a different time zone, you can set your clock on that one. It's on ESPN, but I'm not sure if that's going to be on the televised ESPN. It doesn't say ESPN Plus, but it might be. I'm not sure. If you're local to New York City, it's in Madison Square Garden that's happening. And again, that's today. So if you are going to check it out, I strongly recommend that you do, because I think that's going to be a huge, huge fight, and it's going to tell us a lot about where Lomachenko is and the likelihood he gets back in the mix with the title picture hunt, because at lightweight, the titles are starting to kind of consolidate a little bit. You know, we're starting to see less and less of the sprawl involved with the title picture. So I think that's a huge fight. It's certainly worth your time, and I definitely recommend that you look at that one for sure. The other fight that I want to call out, this one's happening on Showtime. So it's being sponsored by the PBC. And I know there's PBC haters out there like NSB and others that hate PBC. But the truth is PBC gives us very quality fights. And one fighter that they've supported on kind of a regular basis has been Nonito Donaire, the Filipino Flash, as his nickname is. He is fighting in the bantamweight weight class, and he's fighting against Raymar Gaballo. Now, with Gaballo, I don't know very much about him, but he is undefeated. He does have a very high knockout ratio. He strikes me a little bit, and he's a young guy. He strikes me a little bit as kind of what Carlos Ocampo, Kema, is for the welterweight division when he fought Errol Spence, in that he's a young, strong, reasonably tough fighter, knockout artist. And then Nonito Donaire is basically the veteran of the division. He's 39 years old. He's not getting any younger, but he's still there. He was able to give Inoue, who's one of the pound for pound, according to the media, fits all night long, even en route to loss. And he was able to get some wins recently. So he is now a reigning champion. He's an interim champion, but still a reigning champion for WBC at bantamweight at that age. And he's still able to perform at the top level, just like Gabe Rosado. So this fight against Gaballo, I think, is worth watching because we get to see the veteran in action against basically a young, hungry lion, and kind of see what does Donaire still have it? Is he still basically that top dog, or is this Gaballo make a name for himself by taking out a legend? Again, I don't know anything about Ray Gaballo. I've not seen his fights. I have not done any fight studies, but he strikes me as a guy that seems like he wants to make a name for himself, and I think that's strongly admirable. When I look at Gaballo's record, he's got some solid wins on his resume. He doesn't have very many people that had terrible records. Most of the people had like 1 or 2 losses. So we're talking some pretty tough competition. And again, he's been a knockout artist the vast majority of his career. The only one he was not able to knock out, there's 2, actually 3. Paulo Perono, that's very early in the career. What I'm thinking of here, and some of these early ones, I don't even know if they're worth categorizing fairly, because a lot goes into the politics of boxing with the early careers and how you get wins. It may not necessarily be that you couldn't knock them out. Could have been other factors outside of that. Rodel Garde is another one, same situation, terrible record, but I do think that this is one where it's like, okay, yeah, I don't know what's going on there. And then one other one that I missed was Stefan Young. Stefan Young is a solid fighter. I can't stress enough for you. He's at bantamweight. He's worth watching for sure. He's had some close encounters with guys, because he's one of those fighters that kind of goes to war. He'll kind of go out there and just kind of leave it on the table. So he's exciting to watch. At the time that he fought Gaballo, he was still undefeated, but he'd had some close decisions. And so he just has a warrior mentality. And then Gaballo basically went the full distance with the guy, but beat him unanimously and was the first one to make a statement in that case. The only other one was Emmanuel Rodriguez. Emmanuel Rodriguez is world class in what he does. He's fought Inoue. He's fought Gary Antonio Russell. He's fought Paul Butler. He's fought a who's who of top quality. And anytime he really stepped up, he had a harder time. But he's another one of those guys that's been pretty much solid and consistent throughout his career, though a young career because he's only been in it for like 6 or 7 years. But he's another one that's kind of in the mix as just one of those, I'm just going to go to war type fighters. He has a high knockout ratio. He's out of Puerto Rico. So when I look at Gaballo, I have good hopes for him, and I'm secretly cheering for him, not because I don't like Donaire, but just because I always like the underdog. If the underdog can show up and get the veteran out of there, you're going to make a name, you're going to make a statement, you're going to stamp your legacy getting it started to say, look, guys, I'm here, and I want to go for additional championship gold. This is a good start because he'll have one of the belts at bantamweight that will set him in contention to start unifying with the rest of the bantamweights up there. And then one other fight I will call out. There's two, but there's one that I personally think that is worth specifically your time because the other one doesn't have any known information. It's supposed to happen today, but there's no televised information, so I can't really tell you much about it. That's John Casemiro versus Paul Butler, who I just talked about, Paul Butler. I suspect it's a good fight, but without any televised information, I can't tell you much about how to watch it. Donaire Gaballo's on Showtime. The third fight today is on DAZN, and it's taking place in Liverpool. It's at the welterweight division. It's between Conor Benn and Chris Algieri. Now, these are two guys I know pretty darn reasonably well because they have interacted with fighters that I've followed very extensively. Conor Benn, of course, is the son of Nigel Benn, who has been a legend in boxing. And Conor Benn is making a name for himself. He's had some decent fights. However, his biggest win, I believe, right now is Sammy Vargas. This one is a huge step up for him. Chris Algieri is one of those underrated fighters that he's really tough and durable, and he has fundamental skills that are very difficult for most textbook boxers to deal with, and he's able to do angles and moves. He arguably beat Amir Khan at a time when Amir Khan wasn't yet significantly damaged, and people argue he should have won that fight. And then the only person to date that has been able to completely blow out Chris Algieri was Errol Spence, who stopped him. And even then, Spence took quite a few rounds to get him out of there. Manny Pacquiao couldn't stop Chris Algieri. This gives you a sense of how tough this guy is. Now, Chris Algieri's been out for a long time. He had one get-back fight just recently. I think that was late 2020, possibly early 2021. He had one get-back fight. Other than that, he's been largely inactive. At one point, he was the nutritionist for Danny Jacobs in middleweight. So he's kind of fluctuated. He's gone back and forth from inactivity to kind of one-off fights. And the theory is that he was possibly to the near end of his career, but he decided he would get back into the mix and show that he's still a world-class champion because he took a belt from Ruslan Provodnikov, and that was like his signature moment. He hasn't had a signature moment since. So this is a huge test for Conor Benn. Conor Benn has never fought somebody the caliber of a Chris Algieri that's not going to go away. If he can make a statement like Spence made a statement or even better, it's going to be huge for Conor Benn. Now, because Conor Benn's at welterweight, Chris Algieri is basically the gatekeeper in this sense. If you beat somebody like Chris Algieri and you can do it in spectacular fashion, you position yourself for the likes of a Virgil Ortiz, the likes of a Yordenis Ugas, the likes of an Errol Spence, the likes of a Terrence Crawford. I would love to see Conor Benn versus Terrence Crawford, if only to disprove that Crawford is or is not vulnerable to shots, because Conor Benn, he's a thrower. He's not going to just sit back and box, and he's not going to take it too much easy. However, we know that Crawford is a sharpshooter, as he was able to pick off Sean Porter and stop him when nobody else had done so. That's a compelling fight to me. Conor Benn and Errol Spence isn't nearly as compelling just because Errol Spence is just going to tag him at will on the back foot and make him miss, and I can see that happening very, very easily, just like when you had his dad, Nigel Benn, getting completely outboxed by Steve Collins twice. So perhaps I'm just being cynical, but I would rather see Conor Benn, if he can get past Chris Algieri, take on Terrence Crawford. To me, that's a very compelling fight. Or Conor Benn versus Virgil Ortiz is also a compelling fight. Conor Benn versus Jordanius Ugas, and I know he has to fight Stenionis, and that's a different set of events that's happening later, so I'm not going to cover that here. But there are some guys I think stylistically just mesh. To me, Conor Benn and Chris Algieri should stylistically be an interesting fight if you're going to see Conor Benn just get completely outboxed, but I don't think that's going to happen. I do think Algieri's going to have his moments. I do think Algieri's going to expose some holes in the game because Conor does have holes in his game. I think ultimately Conor Benn's going to get him out of there in possibly 10 rounds or less. That's my theory. If it's a 10-round fight, 8 rounds or less. Like, I think Benn will take a while to kind of adjust to Algieri's. It's textbook, but it's kind of awkward in how he moves and how he throws. I think Benn will take a while to get adjusted to it, but eventually he's going to catch him and eventually get him out of there. That's my gut feeling. So that's how I see it. And again, I'm not going to cover, unfortunately, Casemiro versus Butler because I don't know what the televised is. But Benn Algieri's on DAZN. And again, that's happening in roughly about 5 hours from now. 3 hours from now. Possibly 4 or 5. It's difficult to say because DAZN is a different broadcast time spectrum. Ultimately, it's happening today, roughly around 6 p.m. Pacific. Generally, they're roughly the same, but DAZN might be a little bit earlier, a little bit later. So we're coming up on 2 p.m. Pacific. So it's going to be anywhere in the next 3 to 6 hours, put it like that, depending on how they schedule it. Donaire and Gaballo is going to Showtime. That's in California in Dignity Health Sports Park. If you want to go out there, that one should be a very exciting fight, and we'll be able to test young Gaballo and see if he's worth it. And then the big one's going to be Lomachenko versus Commey. That's Madison Square Garden in New York City. That one definitely is going to happen here in 4 hours. So if you're going to watch any of these 3 fights, Lomachenko Commey, I think, is going to be the one that's most worth your time and money, seconded by Conor Benn and Chris Algieri. Third is Donaire and Gaballo. The only reason I have it in that order is because Lomachenko, Richard Comey is going to be a test for Lomachenko and where he is right now mentally and physically. Conor Benn and Chris Algieri is a test of Conor Benn to see if he's ready to go to the next level. Just like we had to test Virgil Ortiz, same thing. We want to see the guys are able to step up. Donaire and Gaballo is a test of Gaballo, but because Gaballo is largely unknown today, it'll just be the first of what he really needs to have 2 or 3 signature wins to kind of stand out in the crowd, but he'll become a champion at the same time. Being that Donaire is already kind of in age, he's kind of up there, I suspect that Gaballo is going to blow him out. That's my theory. I hope I'm proven wrong because I'm cheering for the underdog. So that's our night of fights. Do check in on each one of those, ESPN, Showtime, and DAZN. So it's an exciting night of boxing. If you don't follow the lower classes, I think you should, but I understand. But I figured I would share this out there in case people were curious what's going on. And then if this is popular, I will cover it on a regular basis to just kind of keep tabs on what's going on out there in the boxing land. Take care.